Trying to figure out what students know and don't know is one of the core tasks we have as educators. It gives us so much insight into the classroom. It tells us when to keep going in our lesson and when to stay put. It tells us which students are excelling and which ones are struggling. It tells us how we need to differentiate to meet our students' needs. It is at the core of what we do as educators. But even though assessment makes up so much of what we do, it is easy for teachers to feel overwhelmed when we talk about data and assessment. And it's not surprising. For one thing, as music teachers, we see 600, 800, 900 students per week. And the sheer volume of assessments alone is enough to make our eyes grow wide and to make us freak out. And then in addition to the numbers, there's also the question of what medium we're going to choose. Music is not a paper and pencil subject, or at least it isn't all the time. When we talk about assessment in music, we're talking about assessment of singing, of instruments, of movement, of speech, of composition, of improvisation. The list goes on and on. So what exactly are we assessing? How can we do it in a way that is fair to our students, in a way that is valid, and in a way that is manageable for us as teachers? Today we're talking about just some general guidelines to keep in the back of your mind as you assess students. These are things that I've learned through observation, through being a music student myself, and through good old trial and error. So let's jump right in. So imagine giving your third graders a multiple choice quiz, maybe as an exit ticket, maybe as a paper and pencil assignment. And on that quiz, one of your questions is, which of the following rhythms is a 16th note? And then you list out a quarter note, a half note, a 16th note, and an eighth note. And students need to circle A, B, C, or D. Which of the following is a 16th note? Now, a question like this can give you some really valuable insight into what your students know about 16th notes. It tells you if they can recognize the shape of a 16th note. It tells you if they know the name of a 16th note. And both of those are really, really important things for us to know if our students can or cannot do. But keep in mind that just because a student can recognize the shape of a 16th note does not mean necessarily that that student knows how a 16th note feels or what it sounds like or how they can use it in a composition. What I'm saying here is that knowledge does not necessarily mean skill. And assessing knowledge is a great thing to do, but you have to realize that when you assess knowledge, you are just assessing knowledge. You are not assessing what the student can do with that knowledge. Number one, we cannot confuse knowledge with skill. Number two, the medium matters. I once gave a really short multiple choice activity to a group of kindergartners, and we were working on musical opposites, so high and low, fast and slow, long, short, things like that. And in this activity, I was going to play a piece of music and students would circle if they heard high or low. And then they would move on to number two. We would play a different piece of music. They would circle if they heard long or short. And it went on like that through about 7 questions. What I didn't realize was how much help those kindergartners needed just following the flow of my worksheet. I was asking them to show their musical knowledge in a way that didn't make sense to them. The worksheet I had created was way too complicated for them to actually be able to showcase what they could do with musical opposites. What I took up at the end of the activity was a mismatch of papers. Some students left literally everything blank. Some students went through and circled every single choice. And then there were some students who were able to follow the worksheet flow really well and show me that they could identify musical opposites. But because I asked students to show their knowledge in a way that didn't make sense to them, the data I got from that activity was pretty much useless. And it didn't mean that students didn't know their musical opposites. It just meant that I was asking them to show their knowledge in a way that they couldn't follow. We have to give students assessments that let them shine and show what they know, not assessments that show what they don't know. And there's a big difference. It means thinking through our modes of assessment really carefully. So if you want to do a pitch matching assessment for your students and you ask someone to sing in front of their entire class, is that student going to shine when asked to sing, or are they going to be too shy to really showcase what they can do? The question is, what other modes of assessment can we think about that will give us accurate data on solo singing in kindergarten? The medium matters. Number 3. keep grading time in mind. Let's say that you want to give out a really short exit ticket at the end of your music class. That seems like an easy thing to assess because each student is only giving you one response. But you have to think about if you're doing that for a group of third graders, you're going to have what, maybe 4 or 5 third grade classes with what, 20 to 30 kids in each class. By the time you go through even such a simple assessment like an exit ticket, you are dealing with so much data. And a short assignment for them to complete means a lot of grading time for you. Or let's say that you're going to test a skill like improvising using quarter notes and eighth notes on Orff barred instruments. One thing that a lot of music teachers do here is they will set up a camera and video their students improvising so that they can still be around to manage the classroom however they need. And then after the class is gone, at the end of your day, you're going to pull out that video, you're going to watch it and watch each individual student and then record a grade for each individual student. Let's be honest. That takes so much time. And I don't mean that you should avoid doing activities that take time to grade later. I just mean that you need to be prepared for the amount of outside class work that you're going to do when you assign even a really simple activity. I'll be honest and say I've been guilty of biting off more than I can chew in the assessment area. I think that it will be really easy to just go through, but I forget how much time it takes to actually sit through and sift through all that data. I guess all I'm saying here is be aware of the time it takes to do assessments well. We have to take down information about our students' abilities, but it needs to be done in a way that is manageable for us in the short term so that we don't burn out in the long term. Number 4 is never, ever, 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 ever embarrass a student in front of their peers. In the early grades, like preschool, kindergarten, first grade, most students are just fine playing by themselves, singing by themselves, performing by themselves, and it's not a problem. Then we hit around 3rd grade is what I've noticed becomes this kind of tricky area to navigate. Some students decide that music is for them and they're going to love it and it's going to be awesome, and then some kids decide music is not for them. And a lot of times 3rd graders start to develop these attitudes like, only girls sing. I'm not good at music. I play sports. I don't do music. And there's this fear that music is such a public medium. Everyone will be able to tell if I can't do this thing. It's not like a paper pencil math test where you record your answers and it's just between you and the teacher. When you do something in music, it is on display for the entire class, and that is such a vulnerable place for us to put our students. We need to be respectful of the amount of courage it takes to do anything performance-based in music. As students become more self-aware, they can also become more self-limiting, and that will change how they perform in our assessments. And social factors play a big part in this. So is music for everyone or is it only for the talented? If you do sports, can you also do music? Do the kids hear their parents sing at home? Probably not. Let's not forget the social influences that students carry into their music class, and it absolutely will affect how they perform in assessments. So instead, establish a culture in your classroom where students feel safe and supported. Lay down really strict ground rules at the beginning when they're in kindergarten before they're scared that say there's never any giggling after someone sings. We only use positive language with our peers. Establish a culture of support and bravery and kindness while students are young and still excited about performing. The last thing to keep in mind when talking about assessment is that every assessment is flawed. The sad truth is that there's not an assessment out there that can give you a true, accurate reading of what the student actually understands about the concept. Assessments don't actually tell you if students know the material. Assessments only tell you how a student performs on an assessment. Some students don't perform well under pressure, so they might flop when you ask them to echo back a rhythm. Some students might know the comparatives high and low, like my kindergartners, but not be able to showcase it in the mode that you're asking them. Some students might ace a singing assessment over So and Me, but not be able to use So and Me in an improvisation. Some students might be able to play a rhythmic element really easily, but not be able to recognize it in a new unknown piece. You get what I'm saying? Assessments are valuable and necessary, but that data is limited. I wish I had all the answers for how to create a perfect assessment every time for every learner. But every time I take a grade in my classroom, it is so clear to me that I'm still learning about my craft and about my students and how to use data effectively. Each student is so different and shows off what he or she can do in unique ways. That student will grow developmentally year after year, which means our checks for understanding have to grow and develop with them. And as we grow and develop with that student, we also have to grow and develop with different educators, with different administrators, with different educational trends that are constantly changing their expectation of our assessment. But as music teachers, we land on our feet and we understand that we are learners first. So we continue to learn about assessment because we understand that this is the best way to know where our students are. When our assessments are thoughtfully constructed and consistently implemented, they can give us a direct picture of our effectiveness as educators. It's how we check for student understanding, but it's also how we check for our own skills.